Ladies and gents, welcome back to Engineers. Today, live from Grakn Studios, we've got Tomás, who's COO of Grakn Labs. He's going to talk to us a little bit about what a knowledge community looks like, or a knowledge database looks like. We're going to talk a little bit about robotics, drug discovery, and some really other interesting parts. So, Tomás, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for doing this, Elliot. This is really great.
It's an absolute pleasure. So, like I said, we are live from the studios. There is some social distancing and some masks going on in the background. So, what are the chaps doing behind you? And what's all this stuff behind you as well?
Yeah. So first, what the chaps are doing there. So they're named Joshua on the right, and to his left is Ganesh. So they're designing the algorithm. Or actually, they've already designed it. They're just making sure that it works properly to make sure that the reasoner, which is effectively part of a very important part of our product, works in a scalable way. So that if you've got a CPU, there's multiple threads in that CPU. So will that computation go into multiple threads so you can do effectively concurrent computation, or will it just go into one of those threads? Up until now, it just uses one thread. Now, I'm sure you can understand that if you use more threads, it speeds up the performance. Doing that is very hard. There's a lot of maths involved, and that's literally what they're doing right now. And they've had a killer week. They've been so happy because what they designed worked. And 2 days ago, they came downstairs and they were smiling and celebrating. So they're doing amazing work.
I love that. Okay, and what's that algorithm actually building towards? Is there a particular facet of the community that you're building or products that you're building for?
So the way Grakn part of a key core part of Grakn is the fact that it does automated reasoning.
Okay.
So the language allows you to represent rules of the world. So a rule may be something like if lo- if X is located in Y, then Y, and if Y is located in Z, then Y should also be located in Z.
Okay.
So that may be a rule. Another rule may be that the sister of my father is my aunt, right? That's another rule. So
Yeah.
if you give the systems two conditions, let's say Bob is my father, and Bob, my father, has a sister Susan, you can now also infer another fact, and that another fact is that Susan is my aunt.
Okay.
That's deduction. That's just a type of intelligence. And that's effectively done by the system in Grakn. Now, the examples I gave were, of course, very simple examples. Now, but if you take that at a much larger scale, it becomes really hard to do. So
Okay.
that's effectively what the reasoner in Grakn does. So if you can imagine, if you have dozens of these rules that are computing over billions of data sets,
Yeah.
there's a lot of performance consideration in making sure that that happens quick and fast.
I'm going to simplify that for my brain and go rules at scale. I
That's
think
it.
that works
There
for
you go.
me.
There
Rules
you
at
go.
scale and for everyone listening. Um,
Yes.
okay. Uh, we can go back to Grakn and what's the mission in the next couple of moments. What's been happening over the last couple of months? I think
Yeah.
they're quite cool and important things to touch on that we've
Yeah.
spoken about offline. So tell the
Yeah.
audience, captivate us.
Yeah. Well, first, I should start by saying that we are extremely lucky, extremely privileged to be in a space in the economy that is fairly, I can say fairly well insulated from the catastrophes that is befalling onto many other people. There's a lot of hardship out there, so I am very aware of the fact that we are in the right place at the right time. So things are going well with us is the bottom line. And we have also been very lucky because at the beginning of this year we had our first user conference. Now, I can't begin to describe how thrilling that is to build a technology from the ground up, build a community around there. We always meet our community during our events over the course of the past couple of years, but then to have our first conference, to see 300 people in the same room, 30, 40 speakers presenting what they're doing with Grakn, honestly, it is exhilarating, and it's a privilege to be able to be part of that. Now, the reason I mentioned that is because that conference happened just weeks before the lockdown was
Okay.
announced. And that really helped us this year, because after that conference there's relations that get created, there's personal relationships that get created, and that really helped us to catalyze some of the growth that we saw this year. Now, the lockdown did have an impact on our productivity. When
Okay.
we did go remote, we did have a situation where, if the type of work that we do, and you can see behind me Ganesh and
Yeah.
Joshua discussing that you can't replicate that remotely, especially the type of engineering that we have to do. So we did have a hit on productivity during the lockdown, and that affected us. And so we were back in the office by June, July, making sure that everyone can avoid public transport. People that live far, we would pay for their Ubers, trying to make sure that we keep, a social bubble in the office as much as we can. Um, and so it's crucial for us, really, as a startup, that we deliver on our goals, because, well, we are a startup, and it's quite
Yeah.
brutal out there for some other ones. So,
Yeah.
but nonetheless, on the whole, it's been a good year. I think we're going into 2021 with big spirits. Mainly, we're releasing our 2.0 version at the beginning of December, and we're actually gearing up for our next conference, virtually, of course, not in person,
Yeah.
at the beginning of next year.
I love that. I love that. And you're spot on. You can't replicate, or it's very tough to replicate, what's going on behind you.
Yeah.
Okay. A lot of startups that I'm speaking to, they're trying to do the same thing as what you've done. Okay. I don't think, obviously, with the protection of everyone, there's no shame in doing that. Okay. So good on you guys.
Thank you.
That conference, 300 people together in one room. We're going to talk about an open source community, okay, and what you're building over the next coming 30, 40 minutes or so. But talk to us about maybe these 300 people, how they've come to know about Grakn and how involved these people are, and what they actually contribute, because I'm keen to understand how
Sure.
people can start to leverage Grakn, and
Yeah.
maybe how these 300 people get involved.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's go back all the way to the beginning, really, because, at the end of 2016, we started the company in 2015, released the first open source version of the product at the end of 2016.
Okay.
Now, and I say that because it's, at the time we were, and we still are, doing something completely different to everyone else in our space. Every other adjacent technology is a Grakn is a new language, is a new way of thinking about data. Ultimately, making developers more productive to solve some of the most complex problems in the world. And and so since 2000, at the end of 2016, we saw people start to use the technology, start to build certain types of software, and all this while, until now, especially until the conference, we've done a lot of community building. So we do community building both online as offline. So online, we have our forums. We've used Slack for a long time at the beginning of this year. However, we moved to Discord, but also a lot offline. So, over the past 3-4 years, mainly 3 years, we've tried to build a community in around 20 different cities. So we've seen about close to 10,000 members across those cities, from West Coast, East Coast, Boston, New York, London, of course, Paris, Berlin, Vienna, Zurich, India, and so a lot of that community building are real relationships that we build with people. And these may be developers that are just interested to learn about cool technology, nothing to do with sales, really. Um, and that has enabled us and that's what we want, to instigate a feeling with people that are part of the community. We want people that, as they join and as they are part of the community, to feel that they're part of something bigger than just this one particular thing that they're doing, whether it's that event or whether it's that software that they're building. We want some people really to feel something, that they're part of something bigger. And so we try to do that with any interaction that people have with us, with our technology, because that's the way we build the product. That's the way that's what defines our engineering spirit.
Yeah.
And so the conference was really a way for us to bring everyone together, because up until that point, I don't know the exact number, but we've done 50 to 100 events all over the world. And, certainly I knew a lot of people, but those people had never met each other. And it's, it's exhilarating to see everyone together in the same room, people that you've known, some people that you've known for 2 years, and suddenly talking to each other about what they've done with Grakn.
Yeah.
That of course helps our adoption as a technology, but also, on a personal note, this is what we decided to devote our lives to. This for us is much more than just work. This is something that we believe in. It's really exhilarating to see that, and it's amazing to be able to lead a life where you can really have an impact at that scale. And the conference was really the physical manifestation of that, because a lot of what we do is virtual, so we don't actually see the people that we interact with. And also, a lot of our engineers, they don't really get to meet the community in person. They speak to them virtually. So to have, our team that normally sits in the office and builds the technology day in, day out, year after year, they now get to actually see with their own eyes really what their technology is actually impacting, and how it's impacting people's lives. And that's something you can't convey over a blog post or over a video. When you meet people, it's that's a feeling that you can't take away. At the end of the day, as humans, we're we do things because we feel things, we believe in things.
Yep.
And that's something that we try to replicate as much as possible.
I love that. What do you believe Grakn can do, or what's the goal?
So if we think of, why does computer science as a field exist? And ultimately is to create tools to push forward us as a human race. And the focus really is on those tools, because through it's through a computer that we get to do something else. And Steve Jobs put it beautifully at the end of the 80s, that a computer is really a bicycle for the mind.
Yeah.
And when we specifically focus in on programming languages are tools for developers to build technology.
Yeah.
And the way in which we innovate in orders of magnitudes and really push forward us as a species at the programming language level is really when we create abstraction layers.
Okay.
And an abstraction layer is effectively creating some sort of language that's at a higher level, where certain operations are pushed down into the system. So you can now focus at a higher level and not worry about certain operations that are lower level. An example is if you take a language like Python. Python is a very, very high level language. Now, if you do a print statement in Python, you just have to write one line of code.
Mm-hmm.
The difference with something like assembly code, which is much lower level, if you do a print statement, you're writing about 50 lines of code. Okay. Now, it's not necessarily about counting the lines of code, but it is about counting, what are all the operations that I need to tell the computer to do in order to get to where I want to go. Now, at the database level, the last time we created a real abstraction layer was back in the 70s with relational technologies.
Yeah.
So relational model and afterwards a relational database. And since then, most of the innovation that we've seen as an industry has been focused around scalability. So how do we build databases that can serve at the same time, can serve hundreds or thousands of users at the same time? And engineering-wise, that's still a big problem to do. But the science has been solved. So, when we look at the type of data that software today needs to use, there's an incredible amount of complexity in that data. And because of that, we require some sort of abstraction layer that can deal with that complexity.
Okay.
And in a nutshell, that's what Grakn does. And the result of that, and again, it's either we do it or someone else does it. The result of that is that we push forward as a species, whether it's to go to Mars, whether it's to, build the next dating app. but it's really about, how do we allow ourselves as a species to push ourselves forward by creating those tools that allow us to push those frontiers.
Okay. And what impact can you give your users, or why are your users using Grakn? Not just because you're the only thing that's out there right now, but why would they use you? What can you do for them?
So the Grakn, fundamentally, the way we think of it, so to take what I just said and kind of go a step further on the way how we do it,
Yeah.
is by building a knowledge base. And the the way we do it is, and do you mind? We've got a couple of guys playing ping pong. I think I should let them know I'm recording.
Yeah,
Live.
crack on.
Guys, guys, ready? Sorry, I'm recording.
We're
Sorry,
on a
guys.
really important podcast. Get out the way.
Yeah, it's usually it's fine, but
Cool.
it is really loud. I know from other meetings, so it's a bit unpleasant to listen to
No,
all this going back and forth. So I
that's all right.
apologize for that intermezzo.
That's all
Um,
right.
so what I was saying is that we have situations. So we're building a knowledge base, and so we call it a knowledge base because we're storing instead of database, because we're storing knowledge instead of data. And here we define knowledge as contextualized data.
Okay.
And we talk about contextualized data because we mean data that has been reasoned over.
Okay.
And this is really fundamental. And what that means is that if I store in my database, I gave this example just now, but I store my father is Bob, and I also store another fact that my father Bob has a sister Susan, right?
Okay.
Those are two facts. Let's ask a question now to that software. Who is my aunt? Now, a traditional database would not know the answer because you haven't told it yet explicitly that, well, Susan is your aunt. So there's still another step of logic that needs to happen before it can know that.
Mm-hmm.
In a nutshell, that's really what reasoning is about. Now, that example is fairly simple. That's just effectively a two hop that we're now abstracting to just one hop. But
Yeah.
imagine having to have 10 hops or 100 hops or 1,000 hops. That's where the science, the field of automated reasoning is for. Now, the field itself has existed for many decades. In fact, automated reasoning as a subfield of symbolic artificial intelligence is as old as machine learning, if not older. But a lot of the problems, and especially when it comes to adoption of this type of intelligence, is that the tools and the languages, they it's extremely complex to use.
Okay.
And so what we're building, we're trying to build a technology, and we think we have, that is extremely powerful, extremely expressive in having that type of intelligence, but also being insanely easy to use. So we put a lot of effort in making sure that the language is beautiful, making sure that the language is elegant, that it's maintainable, high in simplicity. The analogy that we like to take here is that if existing technologies are like a do-it-yourself computer from the 70s, Grakn is like a Macintosh.
Okay.
It's beautifully designed. It's one box. You
Yeah.
can't change things in the middle. Like you can't put your own custom CPU in there, which you could in a do-it-yourself computer. But 99% of the people don't need that. So it's a beautifully well-designed box, and my mother can use it. I'm not saying my mother can use Grakn, but she can use it back. The same analogy holds true for Grakn.
Nice. Okay. So drug discovery with AstraZeneca.
Yeah.
Okay. Spot in robotics. Are you able to tell us about some of the use cases where they were using Grakn?
Where they are using Grakn right now.
Yeah.
So in robotics, the use case is fascinating, and so TNO was the largest Dutch national research institute. So they've got a large robotics team that effectively does a lot of robotics work, and the robotics use case is a very interesting one because there's two tasks that Grakn takes care of in a robot. The first one is that of the positional of or the representation of all the positional objects in a particular room. So let's say let's say the robot comes in right now. Now it will have some sensors. It'll detect that there's a computer. It'll detect that there's a microphone.
Mm-hmm.
But then the question arises: how do they relate to each other? So that's where you create a positional knowledge graph where this computer is on top of the table. The table is on top of the floor. This beautiful microphone is on top of the table, but also slightly on top of the computer because one of its pins is kind of on the computer. So then, if you have all those facts, you can now also reason over them because you can say, is the floor under the computer? And so those questions are important is because if you have a task that the robot has to execute that says, hey,
Okay.
navigate to this particular point, it needs to navigate through all these different questions that may not be a priori defined.
Yeah.
And that's where the reasoning is important. And then there's another part of the robotics use case, which is the representation of the actual hardware of the software of the robot. So the robot will have different sensors. The different sensors will have statuses. There may be different types of weather. There may be battery that is at X%. So if the robot gets a specific task, hey, navigate to this particular point, it needs to reason. It needs to check, okay, given that the fact it's raining, given the fact that this sensor is not good in rain, given that I have only 40% left in my battery, am I able to execute the task? And the reason why this is important is because they need the robots to think independently. They need the robots to be able to be in a desert with no connection to the internet and make those decisions themselves.
Okay, so this might actually sound quite dim. Okay, but we've spoken about some of the logic and a robot not necessarily being able to make a decision if things aren't predefined. So you talk about building something at an abstract layer. Do you look after everything that sits underneath and you're thinking about all the different outs that are potentially out there? Or is it, if you like, self-learning and it understands weather and it understands potentially movement and other things? Which one is it? Or have I just completely misunderstood some of that concept?
No, it's the you're touching on I guess quite a so where the industry is, especially when it comes to AI, is where everyone expects a machine to learn on itself and that's it. But we forget that a lot of our intelligence is actually not based on that. It's based on on our predefined logic of the rule of the world. So let's say if I tell you right now that my father, like I said, my father is Bob and my father has a sister Susan, there's no training that you need to do to answer that question. You know 100% sure that the answer is Susan. That type of intelligence, that's deductive reasoning. That's not a machine learning task.
Yeah.
Now, a machine learning task is where you learn and given some training data and given some subsequent inputs, you can make a prediction what the conclusion should be, usually based on some probability. What you lack there, are you still there? Elliot? I think we have lost Elliot.
Thomas? I think I lost you there for a second. I lost you there.
Yeah, and I lost you.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yeah.
Where were we?
Yeah, no, I was explaining about machine learning and automated reasoning. So going back in time, so the field of artificial intelligence has a lot of different subfields in them, a lot of different tribes. So Pedro Domingos is a very well-respected professor in Washington, and he's got this great book called The Master Algorithm, and he argues about how all the tribes in AI need to come together to really build this master algorithm. Machine learning is only a subfield of that. Where we fit in is in this what's called the symbolists, so symbolic AI. So there's no machine learning involved in there, but it's using symbols to first represent the world. That's one. That's where the knowledge representation comes in, and then reasoning over that, effectively allowing the computer to compute and make new inferences based on that. Now, that's a different type of intelligence than machine learning. And so the notion that machine learning can do everything is wrong. And that's
Okay.
why, because usually machine learning is very focused on one very specific task. So you may end up with 500 different machine learning agents that focus on these very narrow tasks that can perform them very well, but there's no context around them. So there's no competition between the two, in the sense that you need to identify, when you're building your software and you're building your architecture, you need to identify what are the tasks that my machine learning algorithm needs to do,
Okay.
and what are the tasks that symbolic AI needs to take care of. And that's where we do a lot of education around. And example especially in life sciences is where there is certain information that is known by scientists that you want to encode in Grakn in the system itself. And that's things like if a gene encodes for a protein, and if that protein is associated with a drug, then obviously that drug is also associated to a gene. There's no machine learning you need to do to know that intelligence.
Okay.
However, you can subsequently, after having represented it in Grakn, do very interesting machine learning to predict potential disease drug links based on all your data. So it's all about a division of responsibilities.
Okay, I get that. And just touching on a couple of points in there from beginning of the conversation, you've mentioned that you're a knowledge base, you're a knowledge database, knowledge graph, knowledge base, and a database. Are you all three? Are they the same thing?
Great question. So we consider Grakn to be a knowledge base.
Okay.
First and foremost. And that would be the most computer scientific accurate term to describe Grakn. Now,
Okay.
in all honesty, the term knowledge graph could also be used to describe Grakn, given the technology. The issue is that there is no clear, depends on who you ask, and people will disagree on what I'm saying now, but there's not the clear definition of what a knowledge graph is. And lastly, Grakn is a database in the sense that it stores our data, and so it's useful to mention that Grakn works as the database because it replaces what the database would otherwise do, in whether it's an SQL database or any other Mongo type of database. In practice, a lot of our application code is now pushed down into Grakn because of the reasoning aspect in particular. So it's slightly nuanced, and I'm sorry it's slightly complex here, but that's the truth.
Where do the challenges come in with being open source? Obviously, they're at the heart of what you're doing, but how tough is that being open source with the complexity that you have?
I don't think there's any tough. I don't think it's tough at all.
Okay.
If anything, it's having the courage, firstly, to open source your technology. I mean, for us, there's no other alternative. Even though we do have some other of our friends in the space that have chosen not to go open source, we believe generally that if you're building a new technology that is going to be so fundamental to any software that is being built on top of you, companies that may build on top of your technology, and you're a data infrastructure company, open sourcing is the responsible thing to do, because people need to see what you've built. You have to be transparent as to what works and what doesn't work, so that people can really look at your code and feel comfortable that the way you're developing is something that they can buy into. So for us, being open source, it's a natural thing to do. Plus, the whole community building aspect of it is fundamentally the only way really you can evangelize a technology product. So from our point of view, if we are serious about making an impact in the world, there's no other option than going open source, I'm afraid.
Yeah, no, good idea.
That's great. We love it.
Yeah, good. Okay. It's nice to see that the community is so key. They're the nucleus as well of what you're building. What's it like to work at Grakn, apart from algorithms on a whiteboard, ping pong tables while people are trying to have really important podcasts? What's it like to work at Grakn? What technical challenges go on or spar between each other on a day-to-day basis, and What's that culture like? 5 questions in there probably, but give us some of that.
Yeah. So, and this is also down to what are the types of people that we're looking for. If you're listening, we're always looking for extraordinary people. Um, the What's really one of the most important things that we want everyone in the company to have is to be purposeful in the decisions that we've made in life. Um, and so being purposeful in how we've led our life and how we want to lead our life is something that is also core to the way we as a company are, because we believe that there's a place for us in the world, and so that's something that drives us on a day-to-day, and that's the type of person that we want to surround ourselves with. Then of course there's the intellectual requirement that we need from everyone to be extremely exceptional in what they do and what they've done. um, and and then in the way we then work with each other is to, well, we're extremely high extremely high on the intellectual side, to have an insane amount of intellectual humility, to appreciate that we can never know what everything, and that there will always be people in our team that will know things that we don't. So that comes down to an super important aspect in our recruitment process is coachability. So people need to be able to be coached. If we're unsure whether they can be coached, it won't be a good fit at Grakn, because we constantly give feedback to one another, and we do that because we believe in making in because we believe that's in the company's best interest, not in our best interest, but in the company's. So giving feedback, making sure that we all improve, receiving feedback, and being very open about that is essential. Now that is much easier said than done. In practice, it's really hard.
I was just about to say, how can you really index for that within a couple of hours?
So it's it never stops. So you have to be like that, and it all starts. It does start at the top. So the founders need to exemplify that behavior. Elliot, are you still there? Are you still there? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm still here. Yeah.
I'm just checking if maybe my connection. Sorry. So being extremely open and transparent is a key aspect of that, in especially communicating the thought processes. So being open about, if we have doubts about a particular individual, then discussing that as a team or within sub teams, understand and seeing if people are comfortable, and first making them realize that, and making them feel like they are both owners and have responsibility in making these decisions, in making the environment that they want to work in purposeful, and being very true to themselves, because that means being true to the company. But to go back to that coachability aspect, that one is really hard to hire on, because during your recruitment process, which is a very artificial way of where you're trying to mimic how working together would be, and also trying to understand their past and their skills, it's really hard to find to to see whether people are coachable or not. If while we work together we find out that may not something be that we can actually that wasn't the case, then of course the first step is to try to improve them, because we want to coach them to be coachable, and we want to make sure that they see the points that we're trying to make. But if that can't work, then there's no place for them at Grakn. And so being also decisive in making decisions, into sometimes it just doesn't work out, and drawing a red line, because that also then defines the culture. Culture is ultimately just stories that will be told in the company about actions that may have happened in the past, instead of just values that are put on the wall. There's two great books that came out this year. One that came out just in September, from Reed Hastings, the founder of CEO. His first book, which together with an academic, is a great book. I recommend it to everyone. Netflix is really very fascinating culture they have in giving their staff extreme amounts of freedom, but while saying that adequate performance leads to a very generous severance package, saying that if you're not excellent, you get fired with a generous severance package. And also Ben Horowitz had a great book on culture, and I think he brought it out in June.
Yeah.
But this is a very important topic, and ultimately the culture is defined by, especially in a startup, by the personality of the founders.
Yeah.
The personality of the founders is what drives a culture. Whatever anyone may say, that's what will be the culture for a long time. And we saw that with Uber. Travis was his hustler persona personified the culture at Uber, which worked very well to get them where they got to. But then that led to some unintended problems. And I'm sure Travis didn't mean that. But if you build a company that big, the culture will almost lead its own life. And yeah, it's a big topic.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that I want to ask you in there, but throwing this out there, yeah, Reed Hastings interestingly said he's going to get everyone back in the office as soon as he can, right? Did you see that on LinkedIn?
No, I didn't see that. No.
Okay, I'm pretty sure he did. Also, what's it like, or what have you learned being a startup founder? What's the one thing you learned about yourself?
So well, big question there, but the it's really hard, and I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. So especially if you want to make money, there's other ways to do that. There's a lot more certainty. You'll make a lot more money with a lot less hard work than doing a startup. So and especially this entrepreneurs have a certain status in society these days that I very much object against. I think there's a lot of, we see the good sides of it, but we don't actually see what's going behind the scenes. There's a lot of mental struggles that founders go through that is underreported, and it's a real struggle because ultimately the only real founders are those people that have no other option but to be a founder, because it does require an insane amount of obsessiveness as if you want to, especially if you want to reach the top and want to have a high growth company. Even if you're just a 20-person company, there's being a founder still, and that's the limit of your ambition, especially at a young age. That one shouldn't underestimate the mental struggles that you will get because there's just so many unknowns, and being insanely humble about that, and having a partner that you can talk these things through. We've gone through very tough times at Grakn. We had a downsizing at one point 3 years ago. That for me that made me feel like 10 years older than I was, and so there's an insane amount of humility that, and also just a barrier that just goes away. You have to be completely honest to yourself about things, about what you want, and also to your partner, to your co-founder, and also to your company as well, and yeah, really know what you want. And that's something really hard to say, and that will change over time. But that honesty is something that is very hard to find with some people, especially those that come from the corporate world. Certainly don't have that. At least it's harder because they're, the work life balance or distinction is much clearer. Whereas if you're doing something like being a founder, there's no such. It's just work. It's just life, and you have to be obsessive about wanting to make a difference or about a specific problems. You just have to have an insane amount of obsessiveness, and that's all you can think of. And because and really feel that even if it fails, you will feel that you have lived a fulfilled life because you gave it all. And that is something that is so important, because otherwise when it gets rough, most people will give up, and therefore I believe that it's inevitable what you're doing. You just got to wait for it. Is something that is hard to find in people. When we find it, it's exhilarating to be around such people, though.
Yeah, some people say the fear of failure is a good thing. Some people say it's a bad thing. But for some people, like you say, it's the only option that they've got, and they will throw everything to it to try and make it work. And that's the respect. And like you're referring to someone else before, that's the hustle. You have Travis, I think it is. That's what you have to respect. I completely agree. Nice. Going back to what you touched on in regards to the interview, it is an artificial setting. It's really tough to replicate what a real life working environment will look like.
Yeah.
We didn't touch on some of the technical challenges that probably give the audience some understanding of what a day-to-day could look like, or the conversations. Obviously, if they're watching the video, they can see some of the drawings behind us, but you've touched on things around performance, you've touched on things around scalability. They're things that we've touched on in the podcast before. So what do you think engineers might have to deal with or might have to consider when we're talking about performance or scalability on day-to-day, week-by-week basis?
You mean at Grakn, what we're working on?
Yeah, sorry, at Grakn. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it all comes down to architecture. So,
Okay.
how do we architect and build the software determines most of the way the product behaves. So, at the beginning of this year, we had a certain type of architecture with Grakn using something called Cassandra under the hood and Janus Graph, which are two open source technologies that we used. That was the base kind of underlying technology on top of which Grakn was built. And we always knew that wasn't particularly performant, but it helped us get to where we were, where we gotten to much faster. So now, initially the plan was to take the Janus Graph code base and to optimize it. Unfortunately, we realized that that would have been too much work, and actually building something from scratch made much more sense. So that's what we did. We got rid of Janus Graph, we got rid of Cassandra, and instead what we've done, and this started really beginning of lockdown, we build our own hypergraph. We build our own storage engine instead of Janus Graph, and then we replace Cassandra, with a much lower level database called RocksDB, which is open source, earlier developed by Facebook, and so we have much more access on the performance to optimize Grakn, because Cassandra is a much higher level, much more complex database. So, and that from a performance standpoint, we're now almost done building, stitching everything together. So it's effectively, with that base architecture, putting the existing Grakn, effectively putting that on top of the new one. That's what a lot of the past couple of months have been all about. There's obviously much more than just that, but that's where we're now racing towards the 2.0 release. Then there's another very important component, is that we build a whole automated build test framework that we called Graql. Graql is actually a whole other product that we built on the side, grabl.io.
I thought it was Scrabble as in the game, but Grabble. Okay.
Yeah. Stands for Grakn's Builder.
Okay, nice.
Because it builds Grakn. And what that allows us to do is automate a lot of the CI and the testing infrastructure that we have. So whereas before we used Circle CI, we've now moved away from that when we use our own system. And that has also increased our productivity at Grakn significantly. And so a lot of our philosophy in the way we build the company, not just the engineering, is that if we can automate a particular process by taking a step back and then building that, we will do that. A good analogy is that if you have two wood choppers, and they start cutting down a tree or two separate trees, one guy starts, the other guy waits 6 hours. After 6 hours, the second guy comes. The first wood chopper is already halfway through cutting his tree, but the other wood chopper takes him 30 minutes to cut off the entire tree. The moral of the story is that the wood chopper took 6 hours to sharpen his entire sword, making the sharpest sword that he ever had, and then getting to work. And so that defines a lot of the way we're trying to scale the company.
Okay. I'm convinced that actually that board is just full of analogies by you over the last 4 years, and it's not code. There's 3 or 4 in this podcast. That's brilliant.
Heiko's better at analogies.
That's an interesting perspective. Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. So I can imagine that's what culture is like at Grakn. Talk to us a little bit about maybe not some of the extreme use cases in the robotics and AstraZeneca drug discovery, maybe some of the use cases or other use cases that people are using Grakn for, and which ones are you most excited about that could come in 2021? Because you've got exciting plans.
Yeah. Well, I have a personal. So, firstly, I think all of them are interesting simply because they're using something that we built to make, and we have a chance to make their lives better.
Yeah.
Some of the then I also have a particular interest in some of the life sciences applications of Grakn because I have a personal interest in biology. I've never studied it, but I've had a chance to read many books. I've just finished 2 books on the immune system, which is fascinating. I read this biography on cancer, which is incredible, and it's a so understanding, having that context to understand the efforts, the war really that we have on certain types of diseases, being able to contribute that is really something extraordinary, and also understanding actually what's happening on their end, understanding that by allowing them to find particular proteins that could be special targets for new molecules to bind against those proteins in order to stop a certain disease pathway, and understanding how that molecular structure works is really, really exciting for me. And so, but these projects are long, and so they take time. So what I'm most excited about is seeing real results there. And because a lot of development has happened, unfortunately, drug discovery is a very, very slow process, as we've seen with the whole vaccine for COVID. These things take a very long time. So that's what I'm really excited about. I'd like to be able to tell the world that, look, we enabled this particular group to accelerate their drug discovery from this much to half the time as without Grakn.
We've covered a pretty unbelievable amount in such an articulate way. Are there any simplified key messages that you'd like to deliver to the audience so they can just understand you in just one really snappy, simple way that people can take away from listening to this? By the way, massively, massively interesting, and lots of respect for what you guys are building and to your community. I'm really excited to see what happens in 2021. But sorry, as I was saying, back to those key messages, what would you like to give the people so they can understand just simplified Grakn Labs are?
So ultimately what we're all about is pushing the boundaries of science forward. Okay. The way we do that is right now is by building a knowledge base, because we feel that that's where really we need to do some work. But by no means the life that we've chosen to live is limited to that. There's many other things that we want to do. This is a 20-year journey, maybe longer. And of course, we're always looking for extraordinary people. If that's a journey that appeals to anyone, then get in touch. We're always looking for, as I said, extraordinary individuals. I should also add as another point to the recruitment side is that we do invest a lot of time and effort for recruitment, more than other companies I know, especially at our stage, which I think is really, really important to do that others may not appreciate as much.
Okay, thank you. I think if you're listening to this and you're looking for an environment that's quite clearly, evidently collaborative, 2 really impressive founders, Tomás and Graql, both Cambridge educated, smart guys. They're looking to build something that's like they say, really pushing the boundaries. So there's lots of links below that you're going to see on these guys and girls. Check them out, website, blogs, reach out to Tomás direct. If you think you're coachable and you want to solve some really interesting problems at scale, log into these guys. Tomás, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for coming on and joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Elliot, for doing this, and keep the good work. Keep up the good work. I will do. To be on this.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Tomás. Bye for now.
Bye, everyone.
Hey guys, thanks for watching this episode. Massively appreciate you listening and checking in with us. If you want to find out more about us,
and what we're doing, please check us out on social media. What we're trying to do at Engineers is build a community to drive knowledge sharing and experiences. On Twitter, we can be found Engineers.io. It's no_. We've also got a website which is engineers.io. These links will all be posted in the description. Any feedback and comments are massively appreciated. We're always looking to improve on where we can. Thanks, guys.